My name is Chris Brown. I'm Associate Publisher of Automotive Fleet. Thanks for joining us today and welcome to the session. The title is Electrify Your Fleet with Confidence, Data-Driven Secrets to a Mixed Energy Future. I think we're all in a mixed energy future right now. Fleet managers and even how we live on our daily lives, right? We're going to discuss how fleet managers are managing their journey to electrification. And really, it's all about data, right? Data-driven solutions to drive optimization and efficiency. And really, it's about future-proofing fleets, okay? So let's introduce our panel of experts. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Carlos, why don't you go first?
Happy to do that, Chris. Hello, I'm Carlos Carriedo. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Mobility and Payments at WEX. And I'm super happy to be here today to talk about mixed fleets and why that is such an interesting topic.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for having us here today. I'm Sarah Booth, Director of Strategic Business Operations with Sawatch Labs, and really excited to hear particularly about Emory's story around their mixed fleet evolution. So Adele, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Happy to be here. Adele Clements. I'm the Senior Director for Transportation, Parking, and Fleet Services at Emory University. Very happy to be here.
Great. We are going to start with a poll question. So this involves audience participation, folks. Here we go. So for those watching, where are you in your fleet's electrification journey? Now we've got that poll question teed up. Poll has been sent. Okay. So we're going to give you 30 seconds or so to answer. And thank you all for the input. The answer is going to be coming through in a minute, but this is really a good segue into our discussion today. While we're waiting for the results, we're here today because, the fleet sector is evolving, right? We've got a slide here on Frost & Sullivan's global research. If we can pop that slide up there, I'll just go ahead and move it. There we go. Yeah, so Frost & Sullivan, this is probably not surprising to everyone, right? And it's Frost & Sullivan research report commissioned by WEX, actually. And it found that 80% of fleet operators surveyed worldwide intend for at least 25% of their fleet vehicles to be electric by 2030. That really shows us about the transition is on us, but it also shows us that the transition is not going to happen overnight, right? You can call it the messy middle, you can call it mixed energy fleets. Timelines are certainly going to vary on this, but we're kind of navigating the same path together. In this session, we're going to touch on why fleet managers are embarking on their own electrification journeys, and what their priorities are and what the forces are at play. We're going to look at, what innovations and services are available. And we're going to really kind of explore what the future looks like. I wonder, do we have those poll results? How do we get those results? I'll let someone in the chat just kind of tell me when the results are in, and we can...
I think I can see them, Chris.
Check the survey table.
Yeah, so 75% responded that
they great. There it is. Yeah. Go ahead, Carlos.
75% of those of you who responded said we have already deployed EVs in our fleet. And the other big category with around 25% of responses is we are considering electrification, but haven't started planning. Very skewed towards one side.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's get into it. And next slide, powering the future, the case for mixed energy fleets. Let's flip it over to Carlos and Sarah. So what are you hearing from customers? And then Adele, we'll go to you too, but what forces are driving fleet managers to transition to mixed energy fleets? Carlos, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, happy to do that. And this is based on what we heard from, fleets of all sizes out there. This study conducted by Frost and Sullivan, the one you talked about, Chris, and the results from that survey are that there's three big reasons or three big drivers for fleet managers to consider moving into EVs. And the top three reasons are: first, reducing emissions; then hitting or meeting decarbonization goals; and the third one is cost savings. So it's a variety of needs, but financial needs is an important one. We hear from that study that long-term cost savings are critical, and that means the upfront capital cost of purchasing an EV, which is significant, needs to be a consideration. But then it's about balancing with the long-term view, right? While the upfront cost might be high, the operating costs on an ongoing basis are pretty significant. So savings on a run rate basis are critical.
Yes, sure. Sarah, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, definitely. We hear the same thing, everything that Carlos highlighted and was highlighted in that study. We see fleets all along the journey, which we saw in those results as well of the survey, right? The majority of those fleets have some EVs deployed already. And then there was about 25% of participants, I think, that said, hey, look, we're looking to do this, we're planning to do this, and we're trying to figure out how do we do it in a data-driven way, right? How do we do it so we make sure we're meeting our requirements from a bottom line standpoint, right? We need to make sure that TCO is not higher than it would be with our current vehicles or the ICEs we could purchase. We need to make sure that we're aligning with whatever our organization's sustainability goals are. And we need to make sure that our drivers have a vehicle to do whatever it is that they need to do. And I think what we see here is initially, when you talk back, even just the last few years, sustainability targets were the primary driver for many of the fleets that we were working with or talking to. And we're seeing a bit of a shift now where, because the price of EVs have dropped, particularly on the light duty passenger side, we're seeing that the TCO comparison alone can be enough for some fleets that the EV is the better option, even if they have no sustainability target. And so that's a really big reason to do that analysis up front. We know change is hard always, and knowing what that TCO comparison is and knowing that that vehicle can do whatever it is your driver needs to do every single day of their operations allows you to do that in a way that makes sure you're getting your work done first and then meeting all of your other goals second.
Sarah and Adele, I want to get you just a second because I see your slide up here that really tees up your electrification journey. But Sarah, when you talk about gathering the data, I mean, what are the key considerations there? There's just so much of it, and that's where it's got to be pretty daunting.
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. One of the ways that these types of analyses have been done historically is surveying drivers. That is time intensive. And we all know there is a kind of human bias that comes to that, right? Like, you want to have that raw data to know what those vehicles are doing. And so if you have existing telematics or you have fuel card data, you can run that analysis knowing very much what that vehicle is doing every single day of the year, as well as where it's parking, where it's fueling, where it would need to charge. And that allows you to make sure that you're putting a vehicle in the right application and your driver can feel confident with that.
Sorry, Chris, can I ask Sarah? I think it's a very interesting topic because Sawatch has some amazing tools to be able to automate some of what you just described, right? Is that part of what makes it interesting and why you have such a clear view on why the data is important?
Yeah, that's exactly why I love getting to work in this field and with Sawatch, because we're able to do that with data and kind of remove that human estimate, right? Are we looking at average vehicle miles traveled? Well, what does it look like actually if you get down to every single day? And that helps a driver have confidence that the fleet manager or sustainability manager isn't saying, hey, use an EV because we need you to use an EV. You can say, hey, look, we've analyzed all of your driving and here's what it looks like for you. And you would never need to charge en route midday. You just have to charge at the depot at night, which actually saves you time because you don't even have to stop at the gas station, right? We were working with a fleet recently, and the drivers were like, why do we have to share this data? Like, why does someone else want this data? And then when we got on, we showed them the initial analysis. At this point, we were like a month into the analysis. And the driver said, I get it now. Like, I understand why you wanted to know what I was doing day over day. And you flagged those 3 days over that month where I would have needed to find midday charging because I had some really long travel days. And it actually gave that driver, who was pretty hesitant about their sustainability targets, gave him a lot of confidence that we were not, and their sustainability team was not just pushing EVs on them, but was really trying to do it in a way that ensured that that driver and every driver could do what they needed, and that was the primary focus.
Great. And I want to flip to Adele right now, and I want to put a seed into our speakers here about like what the Sawatch data is telling us that may be a little bit contrary, and just percolate on that one, Sarah. In other words, is the range anxiety, does the data say that range anxiety might not be as big of a problem, but this is more of an issue over here? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Sarah, so let that percolate, okay? And I just want to get to Adele. Adele, can you explain your university fleet vehicles and how electrification factors into all this?
Thanks. So as you can see, we have over 550 vehicles across the university and healthcare. And already, just because we have a dense campus, we use a lot of electric cars. So over 25% of our fleet is already electric, but that's not enough to get us where we want to be. We're being pushed by sustainability, but it's also good business sense, I think, as Sarah and Carlos have said. The cost savings associated over the life of a vehicle by going to an EV can be substantial. And we knew that we've got a goal 2050 to be carbon neutral. So 25% electric cars is not going to, as I said, we'll do it. So, and we started with, we didn't have data. We knew we wanted to make decisions, data-driven decisions, and not just get an EV because leadership is pushing us to get an EV. What's going to make sense for the driver, that mechanic who has to use the vehicle every day? So we started on the bus side of the house with our transportation. A lot of university fleets were converting to electric, and there's caveats associated with that. Can you really do your service? There are other costs associated besides just the bus. So we started there, and then we transitioned to our non-revenue fleet, getting the data, and then met Sawatch, and they helped us move down that path a lot quicker, I think, than we could have without data.
Adele, I'm going to just,
yes.
Do you want to highlight any of the wins that you had with the cargo vans?
I mean, I can't, how we were doing that, but we, some of you who have joined us today may have the same opportunity that at the end of a fiscal year, someone comes to you and says, we have funds, we want to buy vehicles. And because of the work we had done with Sawatch, we knew which vehicles could be replaced with an EV. And we were able to add 5 vehicles. 4 were e-transit vans. 1 was a Kia Niro, all based on the analysis that we got from Sawatch. They do an easy EV report that tells you which vehicles can do it, whether they have to be midday charging, the cost, life cycle costing about that. Does it make sense to do it? Because you had mentioned, Sarah, the cost of vehicles, sometimes prohibitive. It's starting to come down and making it easier. And so we did, within 4 weeks, onboarded these electric vehicles. The challenge for us was on the EV infrastructure side. I think we're going to talk about that a little later as you do this journey, that there's both. There's having the vehicle and having the charging for it. And Sawatch also helped us figure that out, because all that telematics data told us where the vehicles park every night. And that's where you want to put your EV charger. So it wasn't where you necessarily think the vehicle is, but where it actually is. And that is most important when you're making that big of a financial commitment to put in the charging. So
I want to just double down on that component. Is we have worked with so many fleets who have vehicles that are assigned on paper to a certain location, which makes sense, right? They're assigned to that department is housed at site A. But then when you look at the actual data of where those vehicles are parking, they're not parking there. They're parking at a different site. We see this a lot with universities where also vehicles are parking at multiple locations overnight. They're driven by different departments and all of that complexity. The more you know up front, the more you can avoid putting in charging infrastructure where you won't use it, or replacing a vehicle with an EV that actually parks at 4 different locations and would never have access to charging regularly. And so I think having that data at your fingertips, like Adele mentioned, when you get the opportunity to procure a vehicle off cycle or during your regular procurement process, makes it really easy for you to make decisions confidently.
Yeah, great. And those cargo vans, I mean, the capitalized cost of the cargo van, frankly, is not that much more than an ICE cargo van at this point. And if you can run the high miles on them, right, and underneath the range of the cargo van, it seems to work out. I mean, I know we're going to talk about charging later, Adele, but does that have you found that you can run a good route each day on those?
They none of them have to charge every day. The way they're
Right.
operating, we knew all of this, so that's also gave us some credibility when we said this is the vehicle that we're going to suggest that your leadership purchases. And so the drivers who are using them every day, and there's like 3 levels in between the driver who does it and who makes the decision to buy the vehicle, they have confidence and they know that they can do all of their work charging it overnight. And they had to start with, we didn't have the EV infrastructure in place. So they were having to use our public facing EV charging that we had for our parking customers. So they already knew, if I have to go somewhere and do this. And then we just launched their charging. And it took us 2 years through the permitting process, the infrastructure assessment, transformer, electrical panels, all of that. But it gave them confidence, and they love those vehicles. Absolutely love them. And I mean, from a maintenance cost perspective, I went back and looked at the history in preparing for this. And other than the telematics fees and the electrical costs and the annual registration, one of the vehicles had to have some air put in the tires that our fleet technician did for them. But they're amazing.
Right. Okay. Let's just move on to the steps towards EV adoption. That's exactly what we've been talking about. I mean, this is I guess a good intro to Sawatch. And Sarah, you've already been really talking about Sawatch. Just tee up really quickly again and we got a slide here about Sawatch Labs. Go ahead.
Yeah, glad to do it. I think first, thank you, Adele, for highlighting everything I was planning to talk about. It's always nice to hear from someone else. So we were founded in 2018, and we really focus on that operational data, be it telematics or fuel transaction data. We can then run our analysis to say everything that Adele was highlighting, right? Which vehicles can you replace? Where will you save money from a TCO standpoint? Where can you not replace a vehicle? And we find that to be just as important as identifying where you can replace a vehicle with an EV. And that helps fleet managers really avoid putting a vehicle in an EV in a place where it doesn't do whatever that driver needs. And it now is an expensive error, and you're making it so your driver can't do their job, which is the last thing any fleet manager wants to be in a position, right? To be in that position. And so we do this analysis on that day-to-day operational needs, not just looking at the miles they're driving, but really looking at how much energy do they need to get from A to Z throughout the day. And you'll notice that the miles are extremely important, but not all miles are created equal. So if you are operating with a high ambient temperature right now, Adele was talking about how hot it's been on campus, and there's a heat advisory right now in the area, and I think much of the country today, you need to know what that's going to be, because that is going to impact your range. It impacts your efficiency in an ICE as well, but has a bigger impact on those EVs because you have to think a little bit more about where you're charging. And so we're looking at not just the miles, but what is the ambient temperature? What are the speed that each of those miles are traveled at? Are you going up a hill? Are you under load? All of this impacts then how much energy you need throughout the day. And then we can compare that to what is the energy that is available in each battery pack for each available EV that would be a good fit. So that allows us to really hone in on what works best for your fleet. And then we can project out from there what you need from a charging infrastructure standpoint. And so that is the when, where, how long all of those vehicles are going to charge, and then aggregated at each site. So many fleets, and Emory's a really good example. Not only do they have their main campus, but they have other areas and campuses that are a little bit across town. I think the medical campus is one of them as an example. And so you have vehicles that are going back and forth, and you need to know which vehicles are charging where, so that you can engage with your utility up front, like Adele mentioned, also with your engineering analysis to see, do you need any upgrades? Where do you need that charging to go? And all of this, when you base it on that vehicle operational data, you know that you're going to be putting in chargers and vehicles where it works for you, rather than kind of taking a guess and hoping it works in general or works on most days. You want to know it works every single day. And I think one of the best maybe points just to highlight there is, particularly for those folks that are on the call that said, hey, we haven't yet put EVs in, but we're looking to engage with your utility advisor, account manager, whoever's engage now. They will help you figure out what you need, if you need infrastructure, if there's any place that you can't deploy charging infrastructure. It is a really good way to focus on the areas that you can put infrastructure and maybe ignore those places that it would be too costly.
Really, really good point. Let's get Carlos into the action here. And let's see, we're talking about building a mixed energy fleet. Carlos, what do you think about what Sarah just presented?
Yeah, so some fantastic points, and Sarah makes it sound, so compelling to think about considering EVs, especially if you're managing a large fleet, like Emory is managing, like other, WEX clients are, and I think the complexity here lies in. A lot of these fleets have been operating for a while with technology that has been around for a while. And while EV technology is amazing in so many ways, it doesn't solve for every case that a fleet manager or a fleet owner needs to solve for at this stage, right? Technology changes, and it's changing very quickly. But having tools like what Sarah described are critical, because as a fleet manager, you want to make sure you make the right decisions. Sarah talked about costly mistakes. We've seen so many of them, where aspects that should have been considered from the decision-making process were not considered. And now, with all the tools available, a fleet manager can make good decisions, data-driven decisions. And in a world where we will likely have mixed fleets operating for a while, so whether it's because not every use case in that fleet would benefit from transitioning to an EV, or whether it's because the investments in traditional ICE vehicles have been made and it takes that time for them to depreciate, whatever the reason is, the shift will be gradual for fleets that are already operating. And in that gradual move towards more EVs, fleet managers need to make their life easy. And what WEX offers, and what we set out to do when we wanted to be literally leading the energy transition for fleets, was to put together a solution that took into account this transition. And how did we go about it? We set up a scenario and build the right tools for fleet managers to charge EVs with an en route solution, to charge at home, or charge at a depot or at an office or a fixed location, and have all of that flow into the same platform that fleet managers use to manage their traditional vehicles. So today, we're at the forefront of offering those capabilities for any fleet manager who starts going in direction of EVs, if it makes sense for them.
Great. Let's certainly want to get to Adele, because that's really where theory becomes action here. Okay. But let's just touch on really quick, working with your drivers. Okay. Points to consider with your drivers. Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I'm glad to jump in here. And then Adele, I will kick this to you, because you get to work with way more drivers than I do. You know, it's important not to discount that it is a change. A change is hard for humans in general, right? And even though once you've driven an EV, you realize it is like driving any other vehicle pretty much with some minor changes. We've talked to many fleet managers who find that drivers would prefer to take a different vehicle in the pool if they have access to an ICE, if they've never driven an EV. But once you get them in an EV, just like Adele said with those drivers that love those vans, once you get them in an EV and they realize, oh, it's actually just a vehicle, then it's no problem. So it does take a little bit of maybe education and awareness. And sometimes that's just a test drive. We do a lot of fleet managers that do kind of a ride and drive experience. And then maybe Adele, what have you found to be really useful for helping drivers who maybe have some hesitancy around it?
So I'll have to share, we made a mistake when we first launched. We thought we put together a great communication plan for the drivers, all the information in the glove box in case someone else was driving it. And we got feedback from their supervisors that they didn't feel comfortable charging the vehicle and those things. And we could have done a much better job on it. They needed some in-person showing. They had done some with that, but I think you had mentioned earlier, different people will drive a vehicle. Like it's assigned to this one group, but somebody else could have it one day. And then, a month later, somebody else has it. And so with that fear with the change management, all of a sudden that happens with change management, we could have done it better. And for that, I would recommend is before the vehicles ever even get there, just doing some demonstrations with them, showing them, bring somebody from the dealer who has one. Sometimes it's a long lead time, you're not going to get it. And that just having a pamphlet written up isn't enough. And that they can read, they fuel the car. They can, they get the gas from the gas pump every day. There's no problem. And so it was a learning experience for us. And I'm sad to say that we didn't handle it as well as we could have. But that's the opportunity, because once they did get it, there are no issues. And it was, honestly, we didn't show them anything differently than what we had given them, except we changed the format and put it on a larger card.
This is really the good stuff.
That was it.
Yeah.
So, and that helped. I mean, it's not that many vehicles really, right? It's only 5, but one is a shared vehicle among an entire planning, design, and construction group. They didn't have any issues. It was the other front line and that was listening to it and not going, well, wait a minute, we told you, which could have been the initial reaction, as opposed for us, we were a little ashamed of ourselves. So.
I want to let Sarah and Adele riff here a little bit more, because this is really the good stuff here. We're hearing a little bit of feedback from your mic, Adele. I don't know if that's possible.
I get excited and I get closer. Sorry. Is that better?
I think so. But yeah, let's dig in a little deeper. And I mean, Sarah, the questions to ask Adele here on really how this is all coming together. So go ahead.
Thank you. I love this opportunity. We've had a handful of other fleets who have found exactly what you highlighted there, bringing in someone from the dealer with a couple vehicles or even one for them to test out has been a really good way for the drivers to kind of get over that newness, that new technology feel, right? And I just give an example. If this was a municipal fleet that we worked with, and their sustainability person was the one who was really driving the fleet electrification, and the fleet manager was really opposed to it, and the drivers were opposed to it, and the sustainability manager was able to bring in I think it was a Mach-E for their police fleet to drive. And she said that after they drove it, every single officer that had an opportunity came up to her and said, I want that vehicle. Like, forget what I said before. This is the vehicle I want. And that's one example, but I'd love if you could talk about, how any suggestions for how to work with a dealer, like any tricks that you have that can kind of get them engaged and bringing some vehicles onto a fleet site.
I don't.
You don't. Just kind of.
I mean, you just ask. I mean, most fleet groups have relationships with their local dealers. They want to bring them in. Another one, you had mentioned it, engaging the utility. We're fortunate that Georgia Power is very engaged with fleet electrification across the state, and they will bring vehicles in. When we do our annual sustainable transportation fair, they've brought vehicles on site for the entire community to see for EVs. So I don't know that it's a trick. It's just
talk. It's
talk. It's the.
I can
sorry, I don't.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? WEX, as you know, has a global presence, and different countries are evolving differently when it comes to adoption. I've been in conversations with fleet managers who today could not recruit drivers if they did not offer an electric vehicle to drive, because these drivers, especially younger drivers, really like the experience of driving an EV. They talk about how convenient it is, how there's less vibration, there's less noise. So even that is changing. So some drivers are saying, hey, if I will only drive for this fleet if I can drive an EV.
Wow. We have a fleet we've worked with that just took possession maybe 4 months ago of their first Class 8 electric truck. And their drivers, I think they have 4, it's a mixed fleet. They have Class 1 all the way to Class 8, and they have 4 Class 8 trucks that kind of haul across the large metro area, just doing the same route back and forth a few times a day. And their drivers love this vehicle. For a lot of what you said, Carlos, they said it works really, it's much more comfortable. I'm not shaking anymore. That's a big issue, obviously, with those Class 8 trucks. It's quieter, and the braking, because they're in a metro area with stop and go traffic all the time. They said the regenerative braking slows down that truck so much more consistently that it helps them really feel comfortable driving that vehicle. And so I would not be surprised if we see them kind of replace the other ones as they can. Of course, it was, like an 18-month, 24-month process from when they decided to purchase the vehicle to when they could take possession of it. But it's just another example, I think, of what you're saying, Carlos, of drivers, once they get used to it, are like, oh, this turns out it's a vehicle and it's comfortable. I'm going to maybe just highlight one thing that I think we might have had this slide up a bit ago, which is related to the kind of summary data that you might want to consider wherever you're at on your journey. So it's a bit of a transition to kind of loop back to where we were, is no matter how you're doing this analysis, if you're doing it internally, if you're working with a partner, we'd love to work with you, of course, but really, really want to make sure you focus on that operational data first, and think through what applies to your drivers in your situation. And if you're a fleet that operates in multiple states or in a pretty wide region, making sure that you or whatever partner you're working with is taking into account those localized inputs, right? You want to make sure you're looking at the electricity rate for whatever utility service territory you're in. And another thing to maybe flag there is if you're going to offer at-home charging, make sure you're looking at what you have for tracking reimbursement, as well as understanding the variance between that residential electricity rate compared to your commercial rate at your depot facilities. We have some fleets we've worked with that find that to be the lowest way to fuel their vehicles is if they can get their vehicles to be charged at home for any of their take-home vehicles. So while there are lots of difficulties in complexities in trying to replace a take-home vehicle with an EV, some fleets are finding that it offers such a lower cost of fueling that there's a big benefit to doing it that way. And I would say really, really want to make sure what, like Adele mentioned, and we've talked about it a couple of times, is looking at that dwell location. Is it parking at the same location every single night? Is there a lot of variability there? If, also like Adele mentioned, you have multiple drivers, maybe that vehicle is moving between departments, that might make it really difficult, even if it's like a home run from a TCO standpoint, and an EV is a really good fit. If it's parking at multiple locations, you got to make sure there's charging at all of those locations. And that might not be something that makes sense unless you're putting in charging for other vehicles at those locations as well. But really looking at all of that analysis to then understand what your charging needs are. One of the things that we hear from a lot of fleets is, I'm just going to go one-to-one, one charger to one vehicle. Let's keep it simple. That way my drivers are confident every time they come back, they plug it in, it's good to go. And I think that as fleets, maybe in their first rollout of vehicles, that makes sense, right? But as you're getting farther down the road and you're getting more and more EVs in your fleet, Adele, you heard her mention, most of those vans don't need to charge every night. If you can reduce that ratio of chargers to vehicles, you can save a lot of money on the infrastructure cost, and you can save space. And every fleet we work with mentions, they have limited space for where they can put that charging infrastructure. And, campuses are a really good example of very constrained space. You can't just be throwing chargers up everywhere. So every opportunity you have to optimize that and right-size your charging infrastructure will help you bring down that cost.
Great. Hey, why don't we just pop a poll question? Next poll question, you're going to see how important is a comprehensive solution that includes fleet analysis, charging, payments, and data management for your EV or mixed energy fleet. So those results will come in. In the meantime, let's pop that innovations aiding EV integration slide on and really discuss the challenges of managing a mixed energy fleet. How WEX and Sawatch do that, but really also how Emory is doing that, because they obviously run a mixed energy fleet. So Carlos, let's start with you. I mean, what innovations are helping businesses optimize their fleets, and what does the journey really entail?
Yeah, happy to share perspective there. That's where I was going before with what WEX set out to create, a comprehensive platform so that every charging use case is covered under the same platform. So think of a journey where a fleet manager is thinking about moving into EVs, which cases, when, with which vehicles. Once they make the right decision with the process that Sarah described, similar to the process Emory went through, you start using all the tools available for charging the vehicles. So our estimation is that only 20% of charging will be done en route, but it's a very important piece of the equation. And WEX supports over 150,000 charging locations, for example. So that, even though it's not 100% of charging, it's our estimation is 20%. It is a very important 20% because that takes care of issues like range anxiety. And then on top of that, we open the door for charging at home for many users. Charging at home when the vehicles are taking to someone's house at the end of the day is where they charge. So offering a reimbursement solution there so that there's control and a user can separate personal expenses and vehicle expenses is critical to what fleet managers need to manage. And then being able to integrate parking at a depot or at another location all into that same platform. So once you have all of that integrated, you can monitor the performance of your fleet much better. So you can think about asset utilization. Which assets are you using? Where are they charging? Is there a better way to charge? Are you taking advantage of discounts when charging at home at certain hours of the night might be even less expensive than doing it during peak hours, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is it's a platform where you can use data to help you make better solutions and optimize for your cost. And then there's the payment integration, right? So being able to charge in many locations and have that flow straight into a system that lets you keep track of where resources are going, which vehicles are charging where, is a key component, enabling those payments. And once you add all of that up, you can start using other advanced tools such as route intelligence. So with AI, predictive analytics, etc., you can start thinking, well, is there a better way to route my vehicles? Is there a way that I can use my fleet as my asset better? Changing routes, whether it's moving a route that was formerly served by an internal combustion vehicle. If you change to EVs, does that completely change the equation of how you should be using your fleet? All of those are complex problems to tackle, but it's really about using all of this data, using AI and using predictive analytics to really optimize a distribution program.
Yeah, and Carlos, I mean, you bring up a good point, which also kind of factors into our survey results here. Is using data properly, right? And certainly the results are in, and not surprisingly, having a comprehensive solution that does analysis, payments, and data management is extremely important, according to our viewers. And this really kind of also speaks to, hey, they're managing probably 10 different dashboards, at their offices right now. And then you put fleet on top of that, electrification on top of that. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just one more thing. So that seamless integration is just, is key. I'll let one of y'all, if you want to jump into this survey result really quick, Carlos and Sarah, on this comprehensive solution that's needed and managing it all.
Go for it, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm glad to. I think you hit the nail on the head, Chris, when you said there's so many different dashboards and software components that fleet managers have to deal with all of the time just to manage a standard fleet, as is, right, before we even talk mixed energy. And that the more these solutions can be incorporated into their existing operations, it makes it easier. And fleet managers are being asked to do so much on top of a full-time job already. And now it's like, learn about electricity rates. What is the demand charge, right? All of these things are understandably new to utilities, and a way that, to fleet managers, a way that I think fleet managers can really work with others in their organization and to kind of get up to speed on kind of what applies to their fleet is engage with your facility staff as well. I know I said utilities, engage with your facility staff. They speak this language day in, day out, and they can help identify some of those things that you might want to be really aware of before you think about putting charging infrastructure in. Adele, I don't know if there's anything you want to highlight, since you get to deal with all of those different platforms all the time.
Well, it's extremely helpful for the staff to have an integrated system when it comes back to doing recharges. So while we have a big fleet across the university, it is decentralized. So our group supports all of those different departments with their maintenance. So we have a maintenance management information system, and then we're pulling in the information from our telematics to that. We're pulling in the information associated with WEX and things. And if it's all integrated, it makes it much easier at the end of the month when we're sending out recharging to all those different departments, as well as the operational performance information that we're capturing and putting that into a dashboard that the fleet operator, the drivers, the supervisors can use. So from that aspect, it's extremely important. Because when we do something, it's not just how is it going to be for the customer, but how's it for the staff who are supporting the customer. Thinking about it from sort of a design thinking principle, better for everybody.
Yeah, really, really good points. I do want to say that we do want to leave time for some questions, because we do have a few questions, really, really good questions coming in here. But why don't we do this? I know we've got some content left here. Why don't we flip it back to Sarah and Carlos to kind of wrap up the thought process, and then we can leave some room for questions, because we got some good ones.
Yeah, I want to make sure we go to the questions. So Sarah, do you want to start, and I can finish with one or two ideas?
I think with this discussion, everyone else think about, like, what's coming next, right? One of the things that we've talked about, and kind of anyone who's in this space knows, like, most fleets are going to be a mixed energy fleet for a long time, right? Wherever you are at this journey, you're putting your first EVs in, or you've been putting in EVs for a while, most likely you're not 100% EVs. And so this is a environment we're going to be in the fleet space for the foreseeable future. And so I think that, thinking about how this changes and how you look to make the fleet electrification, like management of EVs, just a normal part of your day-to-day operations with all of the tools that you're using right now, like Adele is mentioning, I think that's where we're headed, and that's exciting. And it's probably a little bit bumpy in some ways, and some tools are going to work great. And sometimes you're like, oh, I don't get the data I need for that. So I would say to fleets, please talk, whatever partners you're working with, say what data you need. What is most helpful for you, right? We're still, as an industry, early enough in this transition that there's a lot of data out there. In fact, there's probably more data than anybody needs or wants. And we see this a lot. Let us know what's most helpful for you or whatever partner you're working with. And then that really helps people pull in that insights and get it into those dashboards and get it into your hands so you can make that operation as kind of seamless as possible. Maybe Carlos, I'll kick it over to you, and then really interested in like where Adele sees this going as she's in the thick of the mixed energy fleet.
Yes, also super interested in hearing Adele's perspective. But I'll just kind of round up what you said, Sarah, around with all the tools that are available now for anyone who's considering EVs, it's the right time to start using the data in a way that lets you make the right decisions for your organization. Because we have seen in the past a bad decision can derail a program for a long time. And it's a shame that when that happens, because it's not only derailing a program that could be very efficient for your organization. It's a program that could lead to solving for so many of the things that are the respondents of our study wanted to tackle. So use the data, use some of the tools available, and that should help you make a good decision for your fleet at any moment in time. All right, Adele, what's your view?
Are we back to innovation? What I didn't mean to get lost. I was listening to what you're saying, Carlos, and going back to something you had said about using AI and predictive analysis to help fleets determine if they change like their routes and things like that. Could their the vehicle then be changed to an EV? Because I was thinking about how that could apply here. Sorry, I'm always looking at what makes things better here. We're data rich, like Sarah said, in terms of the industry. If you want that information, you can get it. It may take putting telematics in. It's finding out what problem are you trying to solve. If you're not, I think there was only 25% said they are thinking about getting on the journey, but 75% already have EVs. And that's going to stay the same. So it's not just improving efficiency with EV adoption, but what can you do with the existing vehicles that you have that can't be changed yet to EVs? Not to take us off the EV bus, but that data also lets you know what's going on that side of the fleet that can't change. So did that?
Let's oh, I'm sorry, I stepped on you, sir. Adele.
No, it's fine.
Let's roll to the Q&A. I am going to serve up this one on how do you address offsite EV charging when the operators don't want to use their personal smartphone for the app? Are there any other options? Carlos, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it happens often. So, well, it depends on where they're charging, right? I'm assuming charging en route, because charging at home, you don't need a payment mechanism. The issue there is about reimbursing those expenses. So if you're charging en route, there's several tools, right? Whether it's a personal fob or key that WEX can assign to each driver, then they can carry that around. which is one of the ways to sort through that. But then there's other payment mechanisms. The traditional fuel card that WEX offers, it's the traditional plastic that has been used for a while to charge traditional fuel at a gas station. There's another version of that a program manager can assign to each of their drivers, or even to each of their vehicles. Sometimes the card is assigned to a specific vehicle instead of a driver, which is a great way to keep track of where the expenses go. So payment mechanisms continue to evolve. There's digital payments coming, digital wallet type of ways to pay coming, and WEX is at the forefront of developing all those options.
Okay, this one's a real important one, and I want to start with Adele on this. It's maintenance training. How do you ensure workshop technicians are adequately prepared? How are you addressing that, Adele?
Well, the most immediate question, we just received our 6 electric buses. And part of them going into service is that the maintenance technicians, they're high voltage. And so there's a whole training program from the manufacturer on what those technicians have to go through. You can't just have somebody all of a sudden start working on them. They need to understand the underlying, this even goes with hybrids as well as just pure EVs. And so the onus is on the fleet manager to make sure they provided that technician or have a relationship with a vendor that can provide the maintenance on it. As soon as you get an EV, you can use the dealer. That's what we use for the first couple of years if needed. But that's critical. It's a great question. And the key is just making sure that they have the right certifications to work on those. The right tools change too. So.
Right.
Adele, can I, sorry,
Yes.
Chris,
Yeah,
jump in there.
please.
Can you share a little bit more about how long that training program was from the OEM for those buses?
Well, actually, our maintenance manager is off-site now for, I think, 2 weeks, going through some training, doing it with them. They came on site to do some initial training, but and that brings up a good thing. So the manager is doing that, but what are the techs going to get at their level? And our service is third party, so we work with a TransDev, and so they're responsible. And they have launched EVs across the country. They have them all in place, and it's building on their internal knowledge on that. But the first one I think was 3 days, just the initial, just charging the vehicles because they hadn't been out yet and needed any service and those things. But that's a good question, and I need to ask. So I know he's gone for last week and this week.
So it sounds like there's a mix there. You have some of the training on site, some off site for limited staff.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, the big component that I heard that was really interesting is the third party company you're using for that services. They're already doing this elsewhere. So it's not new to them. It might be new to these individual tech staff, but not to them. Yeah.
No, and that's a great point, because so we asked for an operational plan. How are you going to implement these vehicles? Because it wasn't just, and so if they're large, like you're talking about the Class A, what's the training for your local fire departments, emergency response? If you're bringing something in that hasn't been seen around, so we had to train, we operate in 3 different fire department jurisdictions for the buses and get them familiarization with the vehicle for that. So it's leaning on partners who have done it and then asking to make sure that they know what they're doing. They gave me information, but I had my boxes. It's like, okay, who have you trained? When are you going to do it? Because nothing could go in service until all of that happened. And hence they're still not in service yet, but they will be by August when the students come back.
Let's see if we can bang out 2 quick ones here. What broad strokes on this one, but how do you figure that small and medium-sized fleets? The transition's a little bit different than larger fleets, right? A lot to unpack there. Who can do that in a couple of minutes?
I can take this one, and everyone please contribute. I would say we tend to think about it in, let's talk really small. Let's 25 or less. Generally, we see fleet managers there are able to say, hey, I know which vehicles I'm going to replace, and I know my vehicles well enough to feel comfortable doing that. They're doing a little bit of analysis with their existing data, but kind of putting a few EVs in and giving it a try. Then I think you get to the 25 and up. That I think this question said, let's leave 1,000 plus out of this question. Let's look at the fleets that fall in between 25 vehicles up to that 1,000. we still see that you need to have that data analysis. I think there is a misconception that only the really big fleets need to understand the ins and outs of those vehicles at a really detailed level to be able to understand where we're going to charge, how much charging you're going to need, which vehicles are going to be a good fit. We see a lot of fleets in the 200, 300, 400 vehicle range that are finding they put a few EVs in and they ended up hitting some of those, they make some of those errors, like Carlos had said. They made some of those errors up front, and then it became really hard to get the next EVs in, because now everyone sees this and says, hey, EVs don't work for us. And so I don't think it's different from the data standpoint. Like, you still need to do that analysis up front if you want to put yourself, set yourself up for success. And really, in terms of aligning that charging infrastructure and right sizing it to match with what your vehicles need, thinking about not just what you need this year, but whatever your long-term goals are, you want to be right-sizing your charging infrastructure for now with an eye towards what am I going to need 3-4 years down the line. And then I think you see fleets that are really large. Let's just talk like enterprise, like 5,000 plus. They tend to have some staff that have some hours, or their entire job is related to the fleet electrification process. So it is, I think, hardest for these fleets in the medium size, because it's something that's being added. Hey, do your regular job, plus now figure out how to electrify your fleet. Go. And that's really hard if you're not doing it with data.
Let me see if I can squeeze in one more question, like really quick here. And it's really about like, are there misconceptions that fleet managers have in really about starting the process, beginning the fleet electrification efforts, and also it's about buy-in from leadership to take the leap on EVs. Are there misconceptions floating out there about that point, starting the journey and getting buy-in?
Adele, do you want to talk about from your experience? We can round robin this lightning style.
For us, it started with sustainability. We needed to reduce our carbon footprint to meet our 2030 and 2050 goals. But also, everybody has limited budgets. And if EV is the right solution, it saves a lot of money over the life of it. And so it's worth spending a little bit of money on the front end to make sure EV is the right solution for the long term. I mean, that's what we found. I mean, we had to manage the expectations from senior leadership, just get EVs, with how it's going to work for the front line. And so the fleet manager can sort of be the go-between in between that and become a subject matter expert, or find someone who is, like we did with Sawatch. And they helped us come up with what we needed to do. We couldn't do it on our own. I still can't do it. I got asked this morning can we get some EV class 3 trucks? And I'm like, no, I have to analyze it first. So.
Well, if you 30 seconds, or let's put it 45 seconds before we finish. Who wants to finish strong here?
Go, Sarah.
Yeah, I think range anxiety is one of those things I keep hearing, and especially if you're talking light duty passenger vehicles, it is certainly for some. There are some vehicles that EV is not going to work right now, but I think when we looked across all the fleets we've worked with across the entire country, it's something like 40-50% of those vehicles, range is not an issue. And when I say range is not an issue, I mean, we looked at every single day. Could those vehicles do all their driving and only have to charge at night? And that works. And so I would say the TCO component was really pay attention to that, and the charging component, but the range anxiety, you want to get it right. It's just not as big of a deal as it used to be when we were talking short range Leafs in, 2014, 2015 time range.
And I think that actually brings us back around to that question I said about the contrarian viewpoint that the data is saying. And I had a little inkling in my mind that might be something that you brought up, certainly on range and really what the data says on range anxiety. Well, hey, with that, let's give a virtual round of applause to our presenters. Yay. Thanks, everyone. This webinar will be on demand too. So if you want to come back to it, you can access that on the Automotive Fleet website too. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Chris.
Thank you.